afternoon. It's really a pleasure for me to be here and to share this panel with Fernando Agis and myself, our colleagues at IFE, at the Federal Institute that organizes elections in Mexico, and also to be with Senator Armando Rios-Peter, who has been really a promoter of, well, lots of initiatives when he was a deputy and now that he's a senator, so I'm very pleased to be with both of you here today. You might ask, why is it? Well, I am a commissioner at the Federal Institute for Access to Information in Mexico. I've been a commissioner for 6 years now, so I'm pretty acquainted with the problem of access to information and transparency, and also with the problem of accountability and what we have to do so as to move from transparency and access to information into something further and deeper, which is really accountability, that is making governments accountable before citizens. So you might wonder, why is it that we're going to speak about transparency and access to information in a panel that is about legislative reforms and el Pacto por México, and this Pact for Mexico. But if you look at the Pacto for Mexico, you will find that one of the topics, actually Chapter 4, is specifically about transparency, access to information, accountability, and the fight against corruption. So they are all linked, finally, with the fight against corruption. And the topic of this Mexico Week is market economy and the rule of law, and I believe firmly that transparency and access to information is really associated with market economy, that is fostering market economy, and obviously the rule of law. I should tell you that 25% of those who request public information come from the small and medium economic interests or economic companies. Before access to information, the relation between government and the private sector used to be a corporate relation, that is a relation between corporate interests, and those who had public or governmental information used to be the very big companies. Right. Those who had corporate interests, and in this way they were linked to the corporate interests of the state. Now, after the law, we have seen lots of small and medium-sized companies coming and asking for public and governmental information, and I would say that it's important to register this because it means that it has been helpful so as to democratize the relation between government and the private sector. And we have some studies at FIVE that show that it has really been a way to democratize the relation between private sector and the government. So regarding the rule of law, I would say that it's important to notice that right to information in Mexico, the law of right to information, RTI law in Mexico, was approved in Congress only after we had alternation in power. That is, the issue of transparency and access to information was not a public issue before we had alternation in power. That is, before we had governments that had a democratic origin. And after that, we had, the next step was a demand from society so as to have not only a government with a democratic origin, but with a democratic performance. And the first need of a democratic performance was to have information released and given away to the public. And that is what the RTI Act or the RTI law in Mexico is about. So I'll tell you very briefly that the RTI law in Mexico was approved, was passed in Congress in 2002, so very, very immediately, almost after we had alternation. And in 2007, there was an initiative to have the first constitutional reform regarding access to information, which brought access to information to the constitutional level, so it's now a constitutional right. It's what we call the fundamental or human right in Mexico, which is different from, it's very similar to what happens in Great Britain, but different to what happens in, for example, in the United States, where we have an FOI, Freedom of Information Act, that moves back up to the year 60s. Now, I should tell you that in 10 years that the law has been in force, what we can say is that the fact that it is a fundamental right is now socialized. As we now know that people understand that it is their right to ask for information, and every year we get more and more requests of information. The first year that the law was in force, we had 35,000 requests. Now we get 135,000 requests in a year. Okay. Now, the important thing that I would like to tell you that very important information has been disclosed with this RTI.
Zapato vive! It's un lie, don't believe anything they say.
Okay, so contracts, for example, every contract between the government and any private company must be disclosed because public money is involved in that. Now the second is public procurements, conventions, audits, the salaries of any public servant or any senator, any deputy, any justice in the Supreme Court, the information about how much they earn and what they spend must be public. So the RTI has been really socialized, and I would say that everybody knows that it is an indispensable feature of a government that claims to be democratic. So now we know that it's a feature, but we still have a long way to go so as to turn this RTI law into really what we would call transparency culture. That is, that government performance, everyday performance, understands that transparency should be there. So if you, let's say, if you elaborate a document, every public servant should know that that document is not his, it belongs to the population, and it should be there ready for anybody to ask for it. Now, I would say that the Pacto for Mexico, el Pacto de México, okay? Which is, it's important because I think that for the first time in the last 12 years, if I am not mistaken, Armando, we have an agreement between the most important parties in Mexico about very important public policies.
No doubt it's a great theme in Mexico. Mexico is one of the reforms of the last 12 years that has got really an impact in Mexico's economy and political system is the reform that has to do with transparency. Thank you for your words, and now let's hear from Senator Armando Rios Pinto, please.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor for me to be with you guys here. It's, well, first of all, thank you to London School of Economics, to the ITAM, to the Mexican Alumni Society, and to the current students who are from Mexico. It's for me an honor to be with Fernando and with Jackie. I must tell you that Fernando was my lawyer when I was when I competed for being a candidate for the government in Guerrero. I must tell you that he's a pretty good lawyer. That's why I'm here, Senator. And with Jackie, it's a pleasure for me to be with her in this place. We have been in a couple of battles recently at the Senate. She has been standing for innovative process, and especially for debating against some of her colleagues who are like in this kind of a scandal of different issues. But it's really good to be with them both because they know a very big part of the process of democratization in Mexico. First in the Instituto Federal Electoral, the Electoral Institute of us, which was one of the main pillars in this democratization process and now in the transparency agency. Just as Jacqueline said, the transparency law, the new law that we just passed in the Senate, I think is one of the best parts of the recent process that we must analyze in order to analyze the Pacto for Mexico. I know that everyone is cheerleading the Pacto for Mexico. I've supported the Pacto for Mexico, even though lots of my colleagues from the Partido de la Revolución Democrática, which is the left party in Mexico, are not devoted to it. They're pretty critics. They have criticized it a lot. I've supported the Pacto for Mexico. I must say that it's a good thing to have a roadmap, to have 95 points just to deal and to debate. I think that's positive. But I must tell you that I'm skeptical about the Pacto for Mexico as well. Even though I support it, I'm skeptical, and I've become more skeptical since I've seen the way the PRI has been making the discussions. It's so bad that there's no people from the other parties, so I'll abuse criticizing them.
Lady, sir.
Oh, as you may analyze the PRI through President Peña Nieto, made this initiative for transforming the transparency agency, and it's one of the main parts of the Pacto por Mexico, but as always the devil is in the details, and especially this initiative that was sent by President Peña Nieto had this intention for controlling the institution, and that's one of my main concerns, not only about the Transparency Institute, but also to the anti-corruption agency that we are now discussing at the Senate. And I must say also is one of my concerns about the constitutional reform that was presented yesterday and has to do with the autonomy of the COFETEL, the Federal Commission for Regulating Telecommunications, and the Comisión Federal de Competencia Económica, which is the one you've been talking about yesterday and you'll be talking for the next days. Why is my worries? What has been one of my main worries? They say that the transparency institution is going to become an autonomic one, but the one who names the commissioners is the president. No? So, I mean, it's just, I'm trying to make a synthesis of the thing, but it has to, there's a very huge worry about this. What is my sense that President Peña Nieto is trying to do? Is trying to develop these autonomic institutions and try to control them through those people that he appoints. Because this is not only happening in the transparency issue. This has happened in the security issue, for instance. The Ministry of Gobernación, the Ministry of the House, of the Interior, just absorbed the security issues. And this is a huge topic because they just got like 36,000 policemen in the streets. This is probably the only country in the whole world that the Minister from the Interior takes the police in his hands. Of course, we have a huge issue about insecurity, about violence in the country, but putting the political authority with the security authority is, makes us worry, just because it's a very powerful concentration. And we discussed that the appointee, the one in charge of this police, should be appointed not by the president, but should be confirmed by the Senate. No, it's a very powerful position, and we put in the discussion mainly the opposition, the PAN, the Partido Acción Nacional, and the PRD. We have majority in Senate, so we said if the president wants to appoint one official of this size, of this power, we must have a word on it. So probably we should confirm. And this was a discussion like for 3 or 4 weeks. The president didn't want us, the Senate or the legislative, to make the checks and balances process that is the main part of any democracy. So I just want to give you this, kind of sensations that we've had, because in the transparency institution, in the anti-corruption institution, the president is the one who wants to name, even though it's supposed to be an autonomic institution. And the main trouble we've been having in the discussion is that the president wants to name these people. Why do I give you these considerations about what we're discussing right now in Mexico? Everybody is, as I said, cheerleading the Pacto por Mexico. But the way you develop the agreements and the discussions around the Pacto por Mexico, which is a good roadmap, can take you to different places. Probably they can take you to new institutions, to a more democratized way of considering checks and balances, to more participation of the legislative, like trying to counterbalance the executive. But when you go to the states, and I'm from the state of Guerrero, which is the very last one in the pyramid, no? Trying to see the poorest place, or a not very developed state is mine. I was kind of laughing because this guy's on the Zapatista issue. I will tell them, I'm gonna take you to my state so you can be at the LSE, like trying to put some things in the agenda. But the state level and the municipalities haven't had the same kind of development that we have at the federal level. And that's why it is important to see what's now in the discussion. We can evolve our institutions, we can make them more democratized, as the Pacto por Mexico kind of says, as a roadmap, but we can also go back. We can also go back to the very strong president that we used to have 15 years or probably 13 years with the last priista president. And the sense that I have is that that is the kind of country that some people in the current government, especially President Peña Nieto, wants to do. That's why I tell you about the security issue. That's why I tell you about the anti-corruption agency, that he wants to name those commissioners. That's why he was so angry when, and I know probably not him, but his people who were in the discussion were so angry when we decided that he wouldn't be the one to appoint the transparency commissioners. We said it must be the Senate, because we need to counterbalance who names these people. And now that the Senate has approved it, it's in the Chamber of Commons at the Congress, no? And probably they will want to turn this back. So even though the PRI and the current government have this very nice speech about modernizing the country, I have the sense that they want to re-establish this kind of measures of having power in the hands of the president. The discussion about the debt, I didn't finish it, is kind of the same. We're saying that the Congress should be the one to establish the amounts for the public debt at the municipal and state level, especially if there is a risk of contagion to other states, or if there's a risk of not paying. And the discussion there, we're trying to say that the legislative, probably the Cámara Baja and the Senate, should have a word on that. And they're trying to say, and they want to say, that it must be the Secretaría de Hacienda, the Minister of Finance. So that's, if you see, these kind of discussions are pretty light. So, no, like you will be saying, hey, you have a strong institution for transparency, what's the deal of who names the people? But I think that there is one of the very, very of the most important things about having one kind of country or another. So what I must tell you is that what the opposition, or me as a senator, what we're trying to do is, if President Peña Nieto and the PRI say we want to go against corruption, and they give us like a format of naming their commissioners and trying to have only administrative sanctions. Then we give another kind of proposal. Probably he will go for a 10% of the total enchilada, and we will say let's go for the whole enchilada, because in terms of corruption, that's one of the main problems we have in Mexico. I mean, the insecurity problem has to do with corruption. The 10% of our GDP is lost in corruption. The moral of our society and the disconnection between the governed and the government has to do a lot of loss of confidence because of corruption. So we must deal with this problem. We must deal in the very tiny one municipality. We must attack those kind of governors that use the money for other purposes, and we must attack senators who sell their votes, or probably congressmen who don't attend to one votation, like it will occur right now that the Televisa and Telestec are like trying to search who is going to vote what on the telecommunications issues. I mean, that's one of the main problems we have. And if there's a way to convoke right now, for instance, Europe or the UK, probably dealing with the corruption issue is a good way to say we have this economic advantage, we have all these possibilities, and we are dealing with one topic that can make us become a more modern society, a more modern country. So that's the difference between the Pacto for Mexico, just not for being saying hooray to it, but to try to analyze a different way to make the Pacto for Mexico help us to become a more modern country, a more democratic one. What we will be doing is, if President Peña Nieto says 10%, we'll take the word, we'll take the speech, and just like in the judo, I don't know if you guys have ever seen someone who knows judo, you know this martial art. The judo is based on using your opponent's strength. If he's too heavy, you use him and you take him back. Okay, that's the way you win in a llave de judo. No? So probably that's the way to do now. A better proposal being at the opposition. If they say 10%, we'll go for corruption. Okay, we'll use the speech. We'll give the whole enchilada, and we'll try to defend it, and we'll try to come to the London School of Economics to get some support and to go all over the country to get it. So thank you very much
Seems to me that now it's very fashionable to say we're going to give autonomy to this institution, and so we're going to create the best institution for the country. But I think that the risk, or that's my perception, is that we're just changing, again, as we said yesterday, the power to one place to another, and that's very complicated. It's like starting again in our country. How to avoid that these processes, legislative processes, constitutional processes, be caricatured, or that could happen by some political powers, and especially what can do the social society, the organizations, the academy, what do they do? Do they really have some space?
Yes, there's a feeling that making autonomous a certain body that was part of government is not the solution, so as to make sure that things work out. But I would say that regarding transparency, it is very important to have, if you are going to make sure, you're going to oversee that public agencies give away information, you need to have a body that is autonomous. Actually, even if it is part of the federal government, it has autonomy in its resolutions. And it is very important, because that is what has made it possible for IFAI to enforce the law, to make sure that, I don't know if I told you, but 99% of our resolutions are complied with by the government agencies. So it is because even sometimes they think that IFAI is already autonomous because of the way it behaves. So it's important to have this, and to make sure that in order to avoid transparency from having pushback, it's important to have this autonomy.
How can the Congress guarantee that by appointing the commissioners in IPAI and in the Competition Commission, how can you guarantee that they are going to be appointed for their technical knowledge and not for political reasons?
Talking about transparency, how is it possible that there is a new president and he doesn't even clarify what are his properties and how did he get them? And there is no valuable specified. What's going to happen? I think that's not the best example about transparency in a country, having this president where already there are many doubts. So I think, what can the social society do, or what are the Senate and the deputies doing for that, or your own organization?
Should the strife against security and the security problems we have be held under legislative accountability or any format of accountability, or should they remain classified? Most of the time, I'm a security specialist, and most of the time how it happens in the UK and in the US is they are held under legislative oversight and accountability to avoid these issues of inefficiency or further abuse of, for instance, human rights. Should that be the case of Mexico? And if so, who would be, or would the FI be that institution, or would it be necessary to found or have another one? Thank you.
I was a congressman in the last legislature, and we had 14 months without a decision for 3 commissioners of the Instituto Federal Electoral. So I was the president of the Junta de Coordinación Política of the Congress. So when I arrived, we had 14 months without deciding this. Why? Because the parties wanted to have one commissioner on their own. The PRD wanted 1, the PRI wanted 2 actually, right? There were 3 and the PRI wanted 2. And they were trying to put people not autonomical. They wanted to put commissioners made on their own to satisfy their own interests. I mean, that happens. But I think that having more actors involved is always better than having just one power. I think that's a main premise. The second one is the rules to guarantee you how to name people. I've been arguing as a senator that you must have not the 50% plus 1, or not even the 2/3. I would say that you must name, in each case, when you're talking about this, you must name 1, probably as a whole majority. I mean, probably not the 100% of votes, but you should have 75% of votes. Why? Because that, in the way that political parties behave, you may have the 3 main parties trying to resolve about one name at a time, and then you don't have this soluciones de esquina, no? I think that's a good way to solve it, but I would say it's always better to have different powers involved to counterbalance and to make it transparent who has. If you're going to name someone and it's not a good person, probably the whole process, the whole political process takes this information out, and I think that's better than only having one who names it. I would go for that counterbalance. It works pretty well in most countries.
I'll start by this: how to make sure appointments of commissioners or councillors or any autonomous body, how to make sure that they do what they are supposed to do. I think that obviously having the correct profile in the first place. And then the second, I do think that civil society should be taken into consideration. And how is that done? Well, if it's the Congress or the Senate that comes up with, let's say, 3 candidates for 1 post, well, let's open it to civil society, have their comments. Do they fill the profile or not? Because I do think that that is important. I can tell you that profiles are always in the laws. They say, well, to be an electoral councillor, you have to be this and this and this, but it's always very general, so you have to have somebody to overlook this, and I do think that it must be civil society. That doesn't mean that you should go back to what was done in 2008, when they decided to open it to anybody to be an electoral councillor, and then they say, okay, Now you come, you register yourself, you come, and then you make a paper regarding that, so that we know what your knowledge is about elections, and then the deputies started giving notes to those papers, and they said to one that was an expert, they said, I give you 0. 0 why? Because I don't like you. It has nothing to do, no? We give that every year to the Secretary of Public Administration, la Secretaría de Función Pública, and they are supposed to keep track every year of how much money you get, how many properties you acquire, etc. And they should have a report on the evolution of your patrimony. Now, the problem is that the law says that if you want to make it public, then you tell the Secretary of Administration to make it public. If not, it's on your decision as a public servant. So, if the law states that it's voluntary, whether you release information or not, well, anybody can have it classified because it's in his own interest. Now, the problem is that if the presidency at the moment said we're going to open this up, and it said every Secretary of State, and any minister is going to disclose his information, and then they disclose half of it, not what you have to disclose, well, then obviously everybody thought that it was making fun of public opinion, right? Because they disclose it, and then they have disclosed it, not even as the law of responsibility in the public sector states.
But he says 3 or 4 properties are being donated.
That's why.
I mean, donation. This sounds like not very clear. So it's exactly the reason why it should be clear. And if he's the president, he should be the first one to give the example. He's not doing it. He's just making himself.
I do think that the law should be reformed.
Yes,
so as to, right, because if not, then the law allows you to say whether you wanted to make it public or not. You have, any way you have to report it. Any way you have to report it, but you may disclose it or not. That's up to you. Well, you want to disclose it, well, let's make a reform. And let me tell you something. There's a resolution in the Supreme Court. Well, it's not a final resolution. There is how do we call it, an initiative from Justice José Ramón Cosío, that has stated that this should be open, so therefore there should be a reform in this responsibility law, the public sector responsibility law, so that you do not only have to give in the report to the public administration minister, but you have to make it public. But then it is a law and it's equal for everybody. And it doesn't depend on whether you want voluntarily to say, because if you want to say half of it, one part, well, that's up to you. It's allowed by the law. So I agree with you, what the government did was not. I mean, they wanted to say how nice we are, I mean, how open, and we want to hear is our information, but they didn't give an information. You cannot find out what kind of a property is that, whether you don't say how much it cost, where it is located, so it's difficult to find out where it is. Now, whether security should be held oversight by Congress, and what does IFAI do? Well, the only thing that IFAI can do is regarding information. So it has nothing to do with budget and control or overseeing of national security budget. The only thing I can tell you is that national security obviously is one of the clauses for classifying information. But anyway, even if some authority of some of the agencies in the national security, well, in the field of national security, any of the agencies that classifies information has to give the fundamentals of why this information is classified. And when it comes to IFAI, we have the right to look at the information, even if it is classified under the Ministry of the Ministry of Defense, or the Ministry of the Navy, or the War, or whatever. We can see the information, and we have opened information, we have disclosed information, even if it said classified or from CISEN. We've seen things from CISEN that were classified, and we've said, oh, there's no harm in disclosing this information. So regarding that, it is already part of that. And let me tell you that so as to make sure what we understand by national security, well, IFAI has its own secondary regulations so as to specify which are the topics that we understand should be held classified under national security, for everybody to understand what our criteria is for national security. Thank you.
So there's no more questions? Okay. So, well, in the name of the Mexican Society and the Mexican Alumni, we want to recognize the speakers. Thank you, and we'll give you a moment. The next conference is going to be at 6 o'clock, and you have to schedule there and